We'll go ahead. I had to be closer. All right, good morning, or afternoon now, I guess. We're after lunch. Hopefully you're all here for risk mitigation and trends in cybersecurity. I'm Jake Blacksten. I am the Digital Solutions Manager at the Delaware Small Business Development Center, and I will be your moderator for today. The way that we're going to work is we're going to have our lovely panelists up here. I'm going to go through their bios, explain who they are, and then I have a list of questions so I can kick things off. But really, we would like to hear from you. So if you have questions, please step up to the lovely mics, or you can shout, and the lovely panelists will answer any and all of your questions. But we'll start with some ones that I already have. Hopefully, it answers some of your questions. So let's start with introductions. We'll start with Jeffrey Bays, and I also apologize, panelists, if I mess up your last names. Jeffrey Bays. Jeffrey is a field CISO for Splunk, where he advises public sector entities across the East Coast on best practices for establishing and improving their cybersecurity programs. John Baimler. John is a tenured technical professor with certifications such as Fortnite NSE8, Cisco CCIE, and has proven record applying technology to help companies of all sizes meet their business objectives. Duncan Puller. Duncan provides strategic direction for Daystore, focusing on upgrading tools and technology that enable simple, scalable products. He collaborates with thought leaders and develops innovative solutions for inclusion into Daystore's portfolio to drive better customer outcomes. And Dirk Swager. Dirk works in cybersecurity consulting and business development at Applied Control Engineering, Inc., ACE. He is responsible for the development and execution of manufacturing and information security projects for ACE. He is a certified CISSP and teaches at Wilmington University. So, welcome our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started with the first question. So this is more of a softball, and we'll start with John, and then whoever, and then we'll work our way down. John, so this one is: what are the top cybersecurity threats for the upcoming year?
It's an interesting question because, in my opinion, anybody that tells you that they know what the top cybersecurity threats are for the upcoming year don't know what they're talking about. So certainly we've seen some trends. Malware and ransomware continue to be top of mind for most organizations. However, we know too that cybersecurity events are heavily influenced by world events. And so, for example, depending on what goes on, say, between Russia and Ukraine, that could easily escalate from a regional, on-the-ground conflict to cybersecurity attacks. For example, Russia trying to attack what it perceives as Ukraine's allies, things like that. We certainly know that the Chinese are very heavily invested in cybersecurity as one of the main pillars of their wartime footing and their wartime strategy. So any escalation on those fronts could turn into a variety of state-sponsored attacks on infrastructure, certainly any defense technologies, and even financial systems. We know that North Korea, for example, a heavy ally of China, is very active in, say, disrupting cryptocurrencies. And as more industries, financial companies, and even individuals start to get more involved in cryptocurrency, that could have major influences from the perspective of, even if you think about cyber terror, affecting the financial markets can have both a dramatic financial impact, but also a dramatic psychological impact. So having said that, the upcoming cybersecurity threats do have a history, as I said, ransomware, malware being very important, top of mind topics for most folks. But I think that watching current events is going to heavily influence what we see in the upcoming cybersecurity threats as well. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded. My wife always tells me that I really need to learn to cut it off, so I apologize in advance.
If I could add to that, I'm Dirk Swigert. I work with Applied Control Engineering. I'm an engineer. We do manufacturing systems and industrial control systems for infrastructure and buildings like this, or manufacturing, which a lot of companies are involved with. And along with what John said, I concur with the global threats. We worry a lot about foreign actors that are trying to do some harm or disrupt our way of life, our quality of life, our safety, literally, in some instances. So I'll double down on that one, but also I'd add to that just accidents in general, because sometimes, you know, somebody throws a switch that wasn't supposed to be thrown, or puts a patch into a control system, and now the transportation system doesn't work anymore quite so well. So we worry about accidents, and also I think a trend that has been going on for a long time, and that is the use of, I'll say, everyday technology, what we call common off-the-shelf Windows, Ethernet, as they are, and the Internet of Things, as they begin to percolate down into our everyday lives and begin to be used in control systems. They bring with them threats that weren't considered before now, and that continues to happen. And so as people become common with this technology and use it in places where it wasn't used before, it brings a threat that we haven't seen.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome.
And just you know, anecdotally, I read something this morning that there's 7,000 ransomware attacks a day. Now, it wasn't footnoted, so I don't know where the statistic came from, but that's a crazy number of ransomware attacks each day. And so even if, you know, the war is settled between Russia and the Ukraine, and the world calms down and the political forces decide to play nice together, there's going to continue to be an effort to extract money from people. And ransomware does that very well. And well-established corporations don't like to share that they've actually paid the ransom, but many companies actually pay the ransom because it's an easier way to deal with it than to actually admit that you had an issue and you know, disrupt your business and potentially risk your perception in the marketplace. So that's a really interesting undertone with the whole ransomware thing. It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? You're afraid to tell people that you need help, and at the same time you're paying money out that you really shouldn't have to pay out to the bad guys, right?
Awesome. Well, while you're talking, I'll actually pose a question to you, which is, how are cybersecurity threats evolving, and what can we do about them?
Yeah, well, yeah. I think Dirk just hit on some really good ones, right? So the Internet of Things has created all kinds of platforms that can potentially be attacked that otherwise wouldn't have been thought of as a risk, right? And so traditionally we've looked at things that are within the IT infrastructure that we have control of and that we have management of. Now that the risk vectors have changed, and the platforms that are potentially attackable have expanded dramatically. And so I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is kind of understanding that the world has changed, that the attackers are more sophisticated, they're state sponsored a lot of times, they're collaborating with one another to fight against the good guys or to extract money or to gain power in a political environment or in a wartime environment. And so there are just a lot of different ways now that we need to be aware of potential threats that are potentially impacting our corporations or our customers. So in my case, I work for a company called Daystore, and Daystore manages other customers' IT infrastructure for them, and so we're helping them solve these problems and solve for these issues. And so we recommend a multi-tiered approach to solving it. There's no silver bullet to avoid these kind of cyber threats. You have to have a multi-layered approach to it. You have to have physical security, you have to have logical security, you have to have control systems in place, you have to train your people, you have to make people aware of the potential threats and where they're coming from. Things that seem innocuous might actually be very detrimental for your company. And so it revolves around a multi-layered approach with backing up your data and being able to restore your data in case you are attacked and you do have to revert back to an older version of data that you have in place. You know, one of the biggest in recent history that we've dealt with there is the SolarWinds attack from a couple years ago, right? So that was something that SolarWinds has 30,000 customers that use their tool to manage their network infrastructure, and the bad guys injected malware into the code, and so when the SolarWinds code was updated, there was malware that was placed all throughout all these 30,000 customer networks, and some people were able to avoid being impacted by that through either endpoint security or really sharp security personnel on staff. But at the end of the day, there are tools that we use today that could potentially be threats that we hadn't considered, and I think that's the main takeaway. There's an evolution and a sophistication in the attacks that are taking place today that maybe didn't a few years ago.
In my opinion, for that and a buck will get you half a Starbucks coffee. There's four main elements to the evolution of cybersecurity threats. The first is organization. For the most part, criminal and state hackers are organized now. Their business models, if you look at a hacking organization, you'll find that it basically has a CEO, a chief marketing officer, et cetera, and so on. So they're getting organized. There's automation, so they are using automated tools. It is not an individual, it's not war games. One kid with a modem war dialing and hacking in. It is, they buy and sell tools on the dark web. You can buy kits, they have malware or attacks as a service, so there's a lot of automation. As the two gentlemen on my left have indicated, there's proliferation. The number of devices that are connecting on the network are increasing and are showing up in devices that it's unexpected. Your thermostat, your doorbell, your refrigerator. And then finally, there's ignorance. So as these devices, as I said, you're ignorant if you're unaware. And so devices that you're putting onto your network that you think are harmless can in fact not be can be harmful. For example, a hot water heater. So I installed a hot water heater. It's Wi-Fi connected, and one of the things that you can do is set the temperature. Now we all know that water that's too hot can be fatal, correct? So somebody, I'm not doing a horror story, but to illustrate the point, somebody pours water for their baby's bath, doesn't check it, doesn't realize it's been turned up, puts the baby in, walks away. There's a problem, right? And so the number one thing that we can do about these evolving threats, and Duncan here alluded to it, is education. Every cybersecurity threat at the end of the day is targeted towards human beings. And most cybersecurity threats rely on a human being to be somewhat part of the effectiveness of what they do. And therefore, in my opinion, the number one thing that is important among folks that are experts in cybersecurity is to assist getting the word out there to family members, friends, colleagues, et cetera, about being cybersecurity aware. And I think that, in fact, it's actually occurring. I think more people are becoming aware, but that's what I think is the number one.
Just to add to that, I appreciate that, because that's what this event is about today to some degree. I'm very impressed that the state of Delaware took this time to pull everybody together, made it Cybersecurity Awareness Month, because it is about making sure that people understand what's going on and just being aware. There are networks that you can participate in of other companies, of in your industry, to share information about what you've done if you can. I know some things are proprietary, but there's lots of ways to get involved and understand what's going on, and that's important.
All right. So Jeffrey, this question's aimed at you, which is how has the continued move towards virtualization impacted cybersecurity from your perspective?
Certainly. And here's your education tip. check the water before you put your baby into the bath. No, but virtualization is amazing technology because virtualization enables organizations to do a lot with little resources. People. It's very difficult to scale people. You also can't scale time, right? It's the one resource you can never get back. So virtualization enables organizations, not just to manage their infrastructure, but also when you consider cloud technologies, containers, containerization, right? The fact that you can recycle resources as necessary based on scripts, based on algorithms, based on a process, all wonderful things. And it's not limited to just the infrastructure, the applications as well. However, there's a trade-off. Whenever you enable usability, make something easier to use, or increase access, things of that nature. Earlier today we heard the morning keynote speak about zero trust. If you happen to be there, or not, the key takeaway there was that the perimeter is disappearing, right? So we're used to perimeters. There's doors in the back of the room. You have to walk through probably 2 or 3 doors just to get here to sit in your seat. But when you start to enable access, enable folks to be more agile, those traditional standards go away. The other tricky thing is the tools that exist to help folks manage virtualization. For example, software switches, right? Or software-defined networking, right? Seems to indicate that you can put controls in place to help secure communications or secure those applications. But that's not actually necessarily true. It's basically perpetuating the old paradigm of yes, no, or stop, go. But we know that the underlying technologies, for example, TCP/IP, are inherently insecure, right? If a port is open and you decide you want to talk to it, it will respond to you, regardless of the multi-factor authentications you have in place and things of that nature. Thankfully, with the advent of layered technologies like secure socket layers and encryption at the presentation layer, you can help mitigate this. But that's the thing. Remember when I started this point by saying virtualization enables people to do more with less, but now when you want to control for it or secure it, you're reintroduced to the challenge again. And so how do you manage that? 2 things. Complete visibility. It's not even just about having all the logs in one place. I mean, most of the time people think that, they think security. It's application logs, it's authentication logs, and it's being able to have visibility across what's actually occurring in your network when someone makes that initial authentication request. Are they outside or inside the organization? Are they an unauthorized user that's an employee? Are they a contractor or a temporary, So it really comes down to design, right? Because when virtualization came out 20 plus years ago, the stuff that we're talking about now wasn't a concern then, right? So you need effective design where not only do you have that complete visibility across security, logs, traces, and metrics, right? Observability as well. But in addition to that, you automate. So as you monitor what's going on in your network, you put controls in place that respond dynamically, because that's the only way you're going to be able to keep up with it.
All right. So, again, if anyone else has questions, feel free to come up to the mics. If not, I have plenty here, but if you want to make it more personal, let me know. Oh, here we go.
This is made for short people.
That it is.
I asked this in the modeling seminar we had earlier at the end of it, but this is something that bothers me because we're always focused on what are we going to do within our own networks to deal with the threat actors. But having a military background, I know you cannot win a defensive war. What are we doing to both change things politically and legally, and what are we doing to change things in our network design to be able to isolate threat actors and to really take care of this and maybe help to end a lot of it, because they're just continually taking shots at us, and the only thing we can do is protect ourselves. We really can't stop them.
Whoever wants to start.
I'll start with that, that's all right. So prior to my role at Splunk is where currently work. And of course, love the fact that it enables me to come to opportunities like this. I was in New York State, and when you work for state government, they don't let you travel to other states, which they did. So how is this relevant to your question? Well, that's the thing, right? If I were outside my state, I'd be outside the bubble. And I think the states are starting to get that, because in the State Board of Elections, when I came on board in December of 2018, there was no communication. There's no communication between local governments, municipalities, and the state. There was a lot of reaction. Oh, hey, we're in trouble. Things don't work anymore. Can you help us? Okay, thanks for helping us. Can you go away now? It was like stuff like that. But people did start to see, because at some point you start to go outside the process and realize we're on the same team here. Okay, maybe we need to get our act together. And then the R word comes into play, the R word, regulation. But regulation isn't bad if we're able to actually bring people together and actually have a conversation about what is meaningful, right? And what I noticed, and I'm sure you can see evidence of that out there and how our government works specifically, is there's a bit of an ivory tower problem, right? And I knew this because I went on a tour around New York State to the counties, and they regularly told me, well, you don't know how we do things. And I would tell them, you're right, but that's why I'm here. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I just actually want to have a conversation with you. And even just starting from that place of neutrality really helped make things even. But the tricky part is, as you all had mentioned, especially you, John, it's how the bad guys are really well organized because they've learned, because ransomware is like a 10-year-old threat now, maybe 12-year-old threat, and it's not going away, is that they make money. So that's where they're getting better at it, more organized and automated. The problem is we're catching up with that. Like February of this year, New York State announced, hey, we're going to do a joint SOC, right, JSOC, between Albany and New York City and their big 5 cities. And right from the get-go, because the idea is great, they don't know who's the CIO in this county. Is that a CIO? Because this guy is a director of technology, but he's also a CIO. But is he the networking guy? Is he the guy we call at 2 a.m.? So you have a lot of layers here, and it's going to take time. And New York isn't the only one. I know of at least 5 different states that are like, you know what, that JSOC is a good idea. I want to do this in this state too. So I feel like they're responding or trying to change things, as they know they need to do things differently. And the last point I want to make is the tricky part is that the federal government, by comparison, is very well funded. And I mean, they're still dysfunctional. I mean, government's got its thing, but they're figuring things out. But it's the local municipal governments, right, that actually have the biggest impact on people, right? You don't go to Washington, D.C. to vote. You go to your local church, right, that's down the road. Your kids go to school, right, also down the road, things of that nature. So I think people are starting to understand they have to work better together. And we're starting to see that, but obviously more needs to be done, and it's going to take time.
Well, I think one of the comments you made earlier too, Jeffrey, is relevant to this topic, and that is you need transparency, right? You need to share knowledge, and I think one of the biggest challenges we've had in this industry is that we've always protected. If we had technology that was best of breed, then we would keep it to ourselves, and we wouldn't necessarily share it with other folks in the community. And I think to your point, you can't win a war by playing defense only, right? And so I know that transparency and sharing of knowledge is not offensive, but at least it moves us down the road so that we have a baseline of knowledge that we can work from, so that we can avoid some of the known pitfalls that present themselves in the marketplace. So companies like Cloudflare and CrowdStrike, who I know is here, they share information. Fortinet shares information with their community of users, so that you can recognize once an attack is recognized, it can be shared with the community of users, and you can defend against it. So again, it's a defensive mechanism, but at least it's a little bit more proactive than the traditional, hunker down and try to hide behind the network.
So I don't work for the government, but I got to believe that we are proactive on a state level against foreign entities. I've worked in relationship or together with the FBI at different points in times, and I get the sense, I can't say specifically, but I get the sense that they're out there worrying about foreign states and bad actors, if you will, and proactively moving against them. I think in the criminal space, you can't really move against them until the crime's been perpetrated, right? So things like these guys were saying about intellectual property, and I'll say knowing who your friends are and who you trust, and making sure that those relationships are strong and robust when you actually see actions moving against you, I think is the best you're going to be able to do. You can't defend against a crime, like I said, until it's actually been committed. So I don't know if it's possible to disrupt, a ransomware organization until they've actually started to operate.
If I may.
Yeah.
When you look, except for the kiddies, the script kiddies, as you may know them. So the script kiddies are folks that do hacking for fun, whether it's bragging rights, whatever. Okay, disregarding those, there's three remaining groups of actors: hacktivists, nation states, and criminals. They say that the best defense is a good offense, right? Now, we have historically, it's been my experience anyway, and I am younger than I look. The fact of the matter is that the remaining three groups are doing attacks based on motivation. On the flip side, we folks on the good side, our approach has been it's a necessary evil, and so we take a defensive approach rather than an offensive approach. And you say, well, what's an offensive approach? In the case of a hacktivist, you have to make it that a hacktivist goes for publicity, positive publicity from an attack. The environment needs to be set up where an attack is bad no matter who does it and for what cause. So in each case, you have to go against the motivation, right? In the criminal enterprise, you need to go after the money. As Duncan said, companies are paying ransom. Companies are buying cyber insurance. Those are all defensive. And why are they doing it? It's relatively cheap and it's easy, but it has no strategic advantage. And so the criminal organizations, because they actually are profiting versus the other groups which are trying to minimize their loss, they are winning. And so in the criminal enterprise, we need to take the profit away. The nation states, same thing. We need to make it where the nation that does a cyber attack pays more heavily than they benefit from. Okay, but I'm not going to solve the world's problems on the one side, and I'm not going to solve social problems on the other, but where I can go is criminal. And where we need to go in criminal, it's not that we don't have the regulations, although Jeffrey's points were very well made, and data breach laws are becoming much stronger, things like that. But where we really need, and this may sound unusual, is we all know that in order to make a so the criminal organizations, there's two threats to them. One is that they don't make money anymore, and the other is they go to jail. So we need to make it, companies need to stop paying the ransoms. And the only way they can stop paying the ransoms is if they get better at their security. But they can't do that if they're taking this minimal mindset. But the other thing, and this I think is a little different from what I normally hear, digital forensics. When you get the criminal that has caught the act, you need to be able to prosecute that criminal. And companies that are ill-equipped on the security side have almost nothing on the forensic side. They haven't kept the logs. They don't have adequate security to who logged in where, from where, and why, that type of a thing. So in each of these cases, there are things that we can do, but laws don't work if we can't prosecute. Financial starvation can't work if people are paying ransom. So it really needs to be, I think, just like with education, it needs to be where we are teaching a new mindset that cybersecurity is no longer a nice to have, If you're going to work on a network, then cybersecurity needs to be designed in from the ground up. And you need to be willing to participate in this offense. That's the way I see it.
Thank you, guys. Anyone else have a question before I go on to another question on my list? All right. Dirk, this one, kind of switching gears, you mentioned operational technology. What exactly is that, and what are the threats against it?
Thank you. So operational technology is sort of a term that's really come to the forefront recently. You might have heard it referred to as OT versus IT, information technology. The basic difference between the two, and the key difference, and a very important difference between the two, is that operational technology works on the physical world. And you can assume assume that that's important to me as an engineer, and you know, we do controls and manufacturing and things like that. But that's what OT does. It pulls in data from the real world in the form of sensors or other types of indications about what's going on, and then it runs through a control algorithm, and then it operates on that physical world. And that's the key, because if it's not managed properly, if it's not controlled properly, then it can make your life uncomfortable. At the very least, it could be threatening to your life or our way of life if it's done poorly or in some way compromised. I was thinking, I went into a conference room about an hour ago with my coworker Tim Mullen, and I sat down. Actually, he wasn't there at the time, but I sat down, and after I sat there for about 5 minutes, the lights turned off, and there was no window, so it was completely dark. And I thought, okay, this is the control system. Now, it might have been a control system right there in the room that was just, sensing that I hadn't moved and turned off the light, or it may be somewhere in a control room in this building or on campus where that sensor is being brought back, evaluated, and it decides to take an action. And so that wasn't life-threatening, although I had to find my way around. I was like, oh my goodness, it's dark. And I stood up and I was like, where is the light exactly? But you know what? I stood up, hey, the light went on, okay? So this is what operational technology is. It's things that you do that are sensed or that are sensed, in some way, and then they operate on the physical world. And so this happens everywhere around us all the time. Water, electricity, transportation, energy, agriculture, all of these buildings, all of these operations and operations technology depend on OT to operate and to keep our lives safe. Traffic signals and self-driving cars, and we talked about the fact that things are getting smaller. Well, we will talk about the fact that they're getting smaller, hopefully, and becoming more independent. And because of that, they can have a greater impact on each one of us.
The baby.
Yeah, the baby. That's a great example, the baby.
Yeah. No, actually, I don't know. My house, coming into Halloween, the horror movies start, everybody gets in the fan. So maybe that's affecting my mind a little bit. But getting away from that, and by the way, no, I'm not macabre. I think it's personal. I think people can relate to it.
Happy thoughts. Happy thoughts.
So I wanted to focus on how the threats have evolved. Now, as Dirk mentioned, operational technology and network-connected operational technology is moving into our own homes. And so who here has a Wi-Fi thermostat? Anybody? All right. Yeah? A fridge?
Not yet.
Okay. So it's happening. All right. Now, how have the threats against it evolved? We have the obvious ones, right? So we had the Colonial Pipeline earlier this year. Now, oddly enough, even though it was a pipeline, it was not an operational technology issue. It was sort of advertised as that, but actually it was a billing system issue. So the company shut down the pipeline because they wouldn't be able to get paid for the fuel. All right, so it was an OT problem, that started off as a back-off problem. How many people here knew that? Yeah. So it was not an OT problem. So first of all, operational technology can be affected by non-operational technology threats. Number two, operational technology has moved from the script kiddie hacktivist thing to psychological terror, right? It is now a cybersecurity terrorist threat. That is, again, we have to sometimes think of security, cybersecurity especially, outside of the box that it lives in. So operational technology is exactly as Dirk described it. But the effects of an operational technology cybersecurity attack can be very, very different. So we had the water supply cybersecurity attack in Florida. Now, people probably didn't think much about cybersecurity in relation to the water they were drinking before that. They probably think about it a lot more afterwards. Now, is that threat real or psychological? So I'm just arguing here too that the threats on OT are moving from just the OT arena into the psychological arena and the terrorist arena, which means that they're now moving into the political and social aspects as well. So the threats are evolving because nation states and hacktivists now realize that OT isn't just about making a pump blow up. It's about terrorizing, say, the northeast part of the United States.
All right, so we have time for about one or two more questions. I am going to jump down to one, which we talk about technology and how to utilize it, but we need people in order to value that technology or make it work. So Jeffrey, this question is posed to you, and how do security teams weather the current talent crisis where there's not enough people to do these roles?
Great question. And probably an area where, quite frankly, we probably don't hear too much about what that means. And so, quite frankly, in very simple terms, there's more opportunities, right, positions available, not enough people to fill them. But it's also a bit of a trend because folks, especially when they leave university with a degree, their primary motivation is, I need a job. Ideally in the field that they studied, right? And it's well known that private industry generally pays a higher salary than public industry. Now, I love that I have this question because the majority of my 22-year career, 16 years of it, was in public service. And actually, I could argue that I'm still employed in public service because I'm affiliated with the University of Albany and their state system. And the reason why I bring that up is because of meaning. So if organizations are interested in attracting talent, they have to actually try harder. And I think that there's a paradigm where the private industry knows that there's competition, especially for top-tier talent. But for a really long time, there was a perception around the culture of public service, state employment, local municipal employment, that folks would have that job and they would have that job for life, right? And earn a pension. But trends are changing and they have been for some time. When it comes to younger generations, they're not really all about, well, you know what, I want this job for 20 years because at least in the New York State pension system, that's how long it takes to earn one. Also, I think because of the nature of culture, and I think we see this in social media trends especially, because they kind of show human behavior, folks want things to change and they want new challenges. So what do organizations, especially the public sector, do about that? It starts with relationships. So it's, actually I was very happy to meet, he was wearing University of Delaware shirt, so I thought he was a student, but he's actually employed by the great state of Delaware in DTI in the SOC, and he was an analyst. He's like the second person I talked to walk in here. And I was so excited earlier this morning to talk to him because young, emerging talent working in public sector when there's a lot of options available, right? And that's the thing. When there's a lot of options available, people want the best option for themselves, right? And while money may be a primary motivating factor, it's not the only one. And so I think public sector organizations are going to be challenged to really speak to people about the benefits that come with that job, the satisfaction of fulfillment of mission, right, as one example. Another example, the technology industry is known at times for being a thankless industry. Let me qualify that. When I say a thankless industry, it's and I feel like the gentleman here could probably relate to this. When things don't go wrong and everything's great, people are like, we got those IT guys in the corner. And then when things go wrong, those IT guys aren't doing their job. It almost feels like a lose-lose. Yet those are the guys, and I got plenty of stories to share about this, that are working 60, 80 hours a week. They get the phone calls at 2 a.m. to make sure things are running smooth. And so culture becomes really important to track talent around the mission, but also the lifestyle. Private industry, I have to admit, Splunk treats me very well, thanks. But organizations are a little bit different with their culture. So I think it's actually really important for public organizations to get into that culture game, to go beyond the mission, to go about lifestyle, freedom. New York State, 37 and a half hours constituted a full work week. And even in IT, I never worked quite 37 and a half hours, but it was less than private industry. And that was nice. Also being able to have better lifestyle management if folks want to plan a family. I think it's a little bit easier when you're in a public sector role to be able to manage your passions, your family, and things that you love a little bit more than private industry. I'm not saying that it's completely off balance, but it's more open, where there's more freedom there. And I think that's a well-known thing. And the last thing that I want to mention are incentives. So if public organizations cannot meet the salary level of the private industry, then it's really important to open up other opportunities. For example, education. When I say education, I mean training the technologies that they use. And also to be more agile, that people aren't stuck in one position, and to in fact rotate them around so they have more opportunity, more freedom, and that they feel like they're contributing deeply. So what I mean by contributing deeply, being very well integrated to the business. Not that you're the Windows admin person or the database person, but in fact that people rotate and actually function better as a team. I think the public organizations have that level of freedom, and the reason why I say that is because I put those programs in the state board that brought in interns that weren't just the interns that sat in the desk and did things like inventory, but actually shadowed the system admins. And in that process of shadowing the system admins, they were able to take notes. And by taking the notes and having the sysadmin check the notes, guess what? Now you've documented a procedure. And because you've documented a procedure, now you can automate. So you see how just by bringing people together, right, to work better together, and of course now that student feels supported, now an impression has been made that this is a friendly workplace, this is a workplace that I can grow, that I feel supported and can make a difference. Now you're really starting to attract that talent because they have a feeling that they belong, right? And when you have a feeling you belong, you have a tendency to stay. Now, right, that's when people talk about like Google's culture or Silicon Valley culture, right? That's the holy grail. It doesn't have to be limited to Silicon Valley, And let me tell you, you spend $30 on a pizza lunch on a Friday, people really dig that. So it's little things that go a long way. So how do security teams weather that talent crisis? Go back to basics when it comes about being people, meaning, and belonging. And in that process, you can get a lot of real work done, like I had mentioned around that procedure and the development and growth of that talent.
Yeah, if I could add a couple things to that. First of all, just regarding the talent crisis, my professor, or the lead of my department, Dr. Fraley, was here this morning. Wilmington University is preparing talent. So I teach 2 classes of industrial control systems and cybersecurity now. I used to teach 1, but there's so much demand. So supply chain is adjusting. I think I also saw a cybersecurity program somewhere for UD out in front. So, the supply chain is adjusting to bring people to market for this. The other thing I'd mention is to grow from within and to leverage talent that you have. Maybe, for example, in my case, folks from IT that could help out in the OT space, hardening servers, things that they may be used to doing, I'll say again, in IT, networking, that actually has applicability down into the control systems, but they've not been allowed to be there. And with the proper relationships and trust and understanding, they can be leveraged into that space as well. And then just to add to that, really, taking it on yourself to some degree to become a cybersecurity expert. I know you're all here, you're all thinking about this. That's another possibility, is again, part of the grow from within, where you take somebody that has a certain skill set and you leverage them into cybersecurity. So just some alternatives.
I think we're moving more towards a generalist society too, right? As opposed to specializing. So when I was in university, I specialized in the field of study that I was interested in. My kids who just graduated had the opportunity to do interdisciplinary degrees. So you can be a biology student and engineering student. You can learn the scientific process, and you can learn how to be an engineer, and you can therefore look at system-wide solutions, or look at a problem from a different perspective, because you're looking at them from two different viewpoints. And I think in our industry, that's certainly happening. We're investing in interns to help train them as they want to kind of test out the IT industry. We bring them in, we train them up, we let them do things, we teach them about security, we teach them about IT infrastructure, and if they like that, then they can grow within a path that they deem appropriate, and if not, then they can go find whatever else they want. But I think it's really important to have this collaboration between private industry and the university system, because it's such an important issue that needs to be addressed. There's just this vast shortage of employees, not just in the security space, but across the board, because as more and more IoT devices are made available, or more and more connected devices are incorporated into our daily life, they're going to be bigger system-wide problems that are going to be developed, and we just need more folks who understand a system-wide view of what's going on in order to solve the problem.
And then I promise to keep this short. Again, making people more cybersecurity aware. If everybody is at least somewhat of a mini cybersecurity expert, then you have fewer problems making their way through, and you need fewer, more specific cybersecurity experts.
Yep.
All right, well, thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for coming. This concludes this session. And so now we are...